Welcome, fellow explorers. My name is Christian Alexandersen, and this is Hemlocks to Hellbenders, a podcast highlighting Pennsylvania's parks, forests, and great outdoors. Nestled in the heart of Pennsylvania's coal region, Delaware Canal State Park stands as a testament to the intertwining of history and nature. Stretching almost 59 miles from Easton to Bristol along the Delaware River, Delaware Canal State Park is a monument to a bygone era. Completed in 1832, the Delaware Canal provided the convenient and economical means of transporting anthracite coal from the upper Lehigh Valley to Philadelphia, New York, and the eastern seaboard. 90-foot long and 10-foot wide canal boats crammed with coal were pulled through the canal and along the towpath. Lock tenders used a series of locks to raise and lower the water's depth, allowing canal boats to pass through. The canal provided countless jobs and transformed the region. Millions of pounds of coal were floated through the canal before railroads became the preferred method of commercial transportation. The last paying canal boat completed its journey through the Delaware Canal on October 17, 1931. Nearly 100 years later, the canal and towpath has become a tapestry of landscapes that beg to be explored by foot, bike, and boat. You could spend a lifetime visiting this unique park and still discover something new every day. The serene beauty and historical richness of Delaware Canal State Park makes it a must-visit for anyone who spends time in Pennsylvania's outdoors. It offers just too much to be ignored. On this episode, we explore the canal's towpaths and locks and learn about the remnants of an era when canals were the lifeblood of the economy and transportation. We learn about the incredible wildlife that can be viewed all around the park, from families of turtles and deer to nesting peregrine falcons and bald eagles. And we discover the diverse flora spread over the many miles of the park. But before we learn more about the park and its history, here's the stats. Delaware Canal State Park is a nearly 59-mile-long park located in Bucks and Northampton counties. Available activities include hiking, picnicking, boating, wildlife watching, fishing, hunting, biking, and cross-country skiing. A notable feature of the park is its local history and bountiful wildlife watching opportunities. Delaware Canal State Park was originally named Roosevelt State Park by Governor Gifford Pinchot. He named it that in honor of his fellow preservationist, President Theodore Roosevelt. In 1989, the park was renamed Delaware Canal State Park. Nearby towns include Easton, Lumberville, New Hope, Levittown, and Bristol. State parks that are close by include Nockamixon, Ralph Stover, Washington Crossing, Tyler, and Neshaminy State Parks. You may enjoy the park if you enjoy long walks, bike rides, and wildlife watching opportunities in a beautiful landscape. I'm excited to welcome Gabie Lent to the podcast. Gabie is the environmental education specialist at Delaware Canal and Ralph Stover State Parks. Gabie, thanks so much for joining the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
How would you describe the park to someone who's never been there before?
Sure. So, just to acclimate everyone first, we sit at the far eastern side of the state, directly adjacent to the Delaware River. And the canal is a National Historic Landmark. It can be extremely picturesque, and all of the towns that the canal goes through, all have something a little bit different to offer, whether it be historical or more, current culture shining through. There's a little bit something here for everyone. We're also pretty unique in that we're extremely linear. So we are 58.9 miles long and only about 60 feet wide. So to put that into perspective, that's about the width of a bowling lane, like the length of a bowling lane, or a tractor trailer truck. So really not that wide. And we're comprised of then the canal, which was a man-made waterway used for the transportation of goods and really drove the Industrial Revolution. And next to the canal is our towpath, which is generally crushed stone or a gravel path that the mules used to pull the boats along. So the park allows you to get this perspective of history while now allowing you to see how we've almost transformed into this, recreational based greenway. So aside from that, we have 3 recreation areas and 2 natural areas. Our recreation areas are going to offer parking and access to the park. They generally have, like restrooms and things like that, and are great for picnicking and such. And then our natural area's main goal being conservation of the resource. And I guess lastly, I'll mention that we are part of the Delaware and Lehigh National Heritage Corridor, which is a corridor that stretches about 150 miles from Wilkes-Barre down to Bristol. So in that regard, we're still just a small part of this network of connecting urban spaces through a greenway.
The Delaware Canal is the only remaining continuously intact canal of the Great Towpath Canal building era of the early to mid 19th century. Tell us about the history of the canal.
Sure. So, yes, the canal was constructed as part of the 1,200-mile canal system created by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They wanted to connect Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Lake Erie. So it played, like I said, that huge role in the Industrial Revolution. It was hand dug between 1830 or 27 and then finished in 1832. So it took about 5 years to, hand dig this 60 miles. And the main job then was to provide anthracite coal from northeastern Pennsylvania to, cities along the eastern seaboard. So it became operational in 1832 and ran for about 100 years. The peak time frame was just before the Civil War, and during that time, it could transport, over 1 million tons of coal in a year, and would have over 3,000 boats using it. So that it's a lot when you think of it that way. And then as the canal did well, there was other industry was driven by it. So these towns popped up along the way near lock tenders' houses, and then additional goods started being transported, like limestone and building stone, lumber, things like that. But, then railroads became a thing. So their development was focused on. And then the canal switched from being state run to privately run. And at the end, it was privately run by the Lehigh Coal and Navigation Company. And the same day that the last boat went on the canal, which was October 17th of 1931, and the boat was empty. It was heading back north. There was 40 miles were deeded to the state under the name of Roosevelt State Park. So that's, when it first became a park. And then 9 years later in 1940, we got the additional 20 or so miles, completing out that almost 60 miles of park. Throughout the 50s, the very southern end of the canal was deeded to the Bristol borough, and it resulted in development over the canal essentially. So we lost locks 1, 2, and 3. And if you were to go there today, you wouldn't ever know that there was a canal there. It's just developed over. But we still have it, just a little bit north of that. It's still there. And in 1989, we got the name of Delaware Canal State Park. And throughout the 80s and 90s, we acquired those natural areas and the river islands. And let's see, 2002, we got the Giving Pond. And then more recently, in 2020, we acquired what is called Buckstone Farm. And that is an area that we're currently exploring developing into like a visitor center of some sort with park administration and maintenance support facilities for the park.
What do we know about what life was like for the boatmen of the canal?
Life was probably pretty tiring, for the boatmen of the canal. And the term is boatmen, but really there was men, women, and children that all, worked on the canal and on these boats at various times. So each day started at about 4 a.m., where they would get up and take care of their mules. And that involved, the grooming of them and feeding and harnessing and just getting them ready to go for the day, because each boat was pulled by two mules. And the mules were their money makers. They relied on them. So I feel like they treated them pretty well. Um, and so 4 a.m., they'd work all day long and then they'd stop around 10 p.m. So it's a very, very long day. And they'd be able to travel about 30 miles each day. And that to me is just impressive because the people who generally tended to the mules, the mule tenders, were like young boys, generally 8 to 10 years old, which meant that they were walking essentially with these mules 30 miles a day. I don't walk 30 miles a day now, so I am really impressed that 8 to 10-year-olds can do that. And, sometimes they might ride along with them, but for the most part, they're walking. Those mules became their companion. Other canals, for example, I know had larger boats, and the canals themselves were larger. So their boats might have the ability to hold, like shifts of crews, so they could switch off throughout the day. And our canal didn't have the ability to have that capacity. So it was just, like one crew that worked 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. So yeah, I'd say they were pretty pretty tired overall. And actually, at our Friends of the Delaware Canal office, which is located in New Hope, they currently have an exhibit on what life was like on the canal. So you can always check that out if you're looking for more information.
The canal has a number of locks that were used by the boatmen to navigate the area. How were these locks used, and can visitors see any of them today?
Yes, it does have locks up and down it. So this is I'll do my best to describe this because it's a little bit hard to describe without this, like a visual. But the canal has one guard lock in Easton and then 23 lift locks. And lift locks is basically what allows the boatman to navigate the elevation change between Easton and Bristol, which is about 165 feet. Um, so the locks are only placed at areas of elevation change. They aren't like evenly spread out or anything like that. So there are places where two can be right next to each other and places where you can go miles without seeing a lock. So to understand how the lock works, I guess it's first important to know that they were run by lock tenders and controlled by lock tenders who often lived in a house directly next to the lock. So can visitors still see the lock tender houses? Yes, they can. The houses are maintained at various stages. So a lot of them aren't open to the public. Some are now private residences. One is our park office. But if you really want to see a good representation, I would say go to the FODC headquarters that I just mentioned, the Friends of the Delaware Canal in New Hope, because they have it's set up more so accurately, much more accurate than our park offices would currently show you, it looked like at the time. And I guess back to the locks themselves. So each lock is essentially an elevator. At either end of the lock, there are two miter gates, which are essentially doors that opened upstream. And they're built in that direction because the water pressure flowing down the canal helped to keep them closed. Um, and those doors are controlled by a number of mechanisms that the lock tender takes care of. So I'm going to paint you a picture to describe this. So you have a boat that is traveling south down the canal, heading from Easton to Bristol, and it's full of coal. Okay. And they approach the lock heading downstream at the northern end. They want the lock tender to know they're coming because time is money. The quicker they can get through this lock, the quicker they can be on their way, right? So if the lock tender seems to not be aware, they would probably blow into a conch shell and let them know, like, hey, we're on our way. Let's start moving. um, and then as the boat is approaching, the lock tender would go out to what's called a doghouse. And it looks similar to what you would expect a doghouse now to look like, maybe a little bit smaller if you're picturing just, like a wooden doghouse out in your yard.
Mhm.
And inside of the doghouse is where all of the mechanisms are kept to control everything that works the canal lock. So the first thing that he would do is open the miter gates. And I'm sorry, not the miter gates. He would open the wickets first, which are located on the miter gates. And wickets are like little windows in the gates that allow water to flow through. So by opening the wickets, the water level inside of the lock begins to raise so that it's equal to the water level from where they're coming from. Once the water level in the lock is equal to that of where the boat is, the miter gates can easily open without, the force of the water pushing against it. Um, so then the boat would enter the lock, and then the lock tender would go and open the wickets at the lower end miter gates. So then the water, once again begins to flow out of those wickets. And once the water level is equal to that at the lower end that it is to that in the lock, those miter gates can open easily and the boat can be on its way. So you can also still see locks, which I believe was the original part of this question too. So locks one, two, and three in Bristol are no longer existent. But going from north to south, lock 22 and 23 at Teddy or Theodore Roosevelt Recreation Area, um, they are still there and pretty accurate. They were at one point renovated in the 1850s, so still canal era appropriate. Um, but they have two right next to each other that you can go and see. They're missing, a little bit, but it's pretty close. Locks 12, 13, and 14 are going to be your most visually historically accurate. But these are actually going to take a little bit of planning to get to. You're going to have to be willing to walk a little further because they're not super accessible. Um, and they were also renovated at one point, but they were replaced with parts from the Schuylkill Canal. So the Schuylkill Canal was larger. The gates wouldn't actually work on our canal if we were trying to operate it at this time. But visually speaking, what you see there is what it was. But probably the best one to see if you're trying to go and see a lock is going to be Lock 11, which is in New Hope. And again, right next to our friends of the Delaware Canal headquarters. And visually speaking, that lock looks newer, but all the parts are historically accurate. So you can still see the locks. It just depends on if you want to go like visually accurate or historically accurate. It depends on what you're looking for.
Speaking about lowering and raising the water to be able to match, how long does that process take from when the boatman signals to when the lock tender actually starts his process? Is that like 5 minutes? Is that 20 minutes?
It can be 20 to 25 minutes, but a really good lock tender could get you through quicker. And it also depends on, how great of an elevation change is happening at the lock that you're at. But generally, yeah, it would be about 20 minutes.
Would it also depend on if somebody just left so then the water is already raised to a certain point, then the next boat can go in and go down? Were there locks on both sides of the canal or just one side? I guess how did that work?
So the locks are, you can pass through them going either direction. And So if a boat was going south and you were also traveling that same direction, the water level would already be at the lower end. So it wouldn't be any faster if that was the case. I think if one was also traveling north, though, it would be faster because the water level would be equal. And in some areas, there are places where you have like double locks, so people, more than one boat could make its way.
Is there something everyone should experience when they visit Delaware Canal State Park?
Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting question because all 60 miles of our canal are pretty similar, but also pretty different. They definitely have, different things to offer. But generally speaking, if you go to our park, you're going to see, the canal and river vistas and small towns and, nature, water in various stages. So a lot of times I feel like where you go and what you should experience is determined by access. So where you can park, how far you're willing to go, what you can access from that parking lot. The entire park takes you over an hour and a half to drive from one end to the other end. So we're not, really condensed like some of those other parks are in the state. So you kind of have to pick and choose what you want to do. I would probably recommend visiting a canal town that shows, what it looked like when the canal was running. Uh, and probably the most iconic is going to be Town. And Town is in Upper Black Eddy. And it's a gorgeous drive to get there. It is like the back roads of Pennsylvania with just like meandering roadside creeks. It's just a really beautiful area. And then you get to the town and you get to see the only covered bridge over the canal. And a lot of the buildings that were there when the canal was operational are still there. So you can see, the schoolhouse, the boatyard, lime kilns, a hotel, the lock tender's house. So it's all pretty neat and pretty accessible too, actually. I can think of three areas off the top of my head where it would be like less than a 4 mile round trip to see it if you were walking. But I will also add that a lot of these are privately owned now, and a lot of them are houses. So you don't want to go, peeking your head into windows or anything like that. People might get upset.
Yeah. And we should make it clear too that despite there being a towpath and where people can walk and ride their bikes and things like that, you can't get in at any point along the way. There are certain places where you're going to have to park and walk in, or places that you're going to have to walk a little bit or drive a little bit. So I don't want anyone to think that they're like, oh, it's like right along a river, so you could probably just pull over and stop. That's not the way that goes.
No, it's not like that at all. Yeah, there's parking lots in various locations and recreation areas that give you access, but a lot of it on either side is privately owned.
And now, let's hear from our sponsors. It's a Saturday morning in your favorite kind of weather. It's a day for hiking. Clearly marked blazes guide you safely along the unobstructed trail, allowing you to get lost in the wonder of nature. Keystone Trails Association makes these moments possible for you in Pennsylvania's great outdoors. KTA's members are dedicated to providing, preserving, protecting, and promoting recreational hiking trails and hiking opportunities in Pennsylvania. Join KTA to help protect the trails you love. New members use the code Hellbenders at www.kta-hike.org to save $5 on a yearly membership. Are you looking for your next adventure? Unlock some of the best landscapes in Pennsylvania with the incredibly detailed, highly curated, waterproof maps from the folks at Purple Lizard. They create extraordinary maps for Pennsylvania's state forests for people who love to explore the outdoors. Find them at your local outfitters, bike shops, and bookstores, or visit purplelizard.com, where your next adventure begins. Let's say a visitor has a full day or a weekend to explore the park. What would you recommend they do?
You could definitely spend a full weekend in our park. In fact, there's a lot of people that do, like those bikers and people who want to experience the whole greenway that I had mentioned, or just decide they want to bike our entire canal. So they definitely spend a whole weekend in our park. If you're not up for, a rigorous bike trip, um, you could do a lot of various things. So overnight accommodations are a little bit tricky in our park. We don't offer any, but our park is also so immersed with the little towns that it passes through that finding them shouldn't be difficult if you wanted to come for an entire weekend. In the southern end, you're going to find more bed and breakfast type places. And then in the northern end, you'll have access to more campgrounds. So I would say if you're coming during a northern or a warmer month, which is when most people I feel like would tend to do their state park trips, I would definitely suggest trying to do some type of boating or something on water. This really allows you to get like a different viewpoint of the park. And I feel like I have to do a little plug for state park educators here because that's what I do. So we offer paddling programs in the park, whether it be on the river, in the giving pond, or in the canal. We can give you a little inside scoop and some history as part of your visit if you choose to do that. And all of our events can be found on our state park website. And yeah, so there's lots you could do in our park if you want to come for a full weekend.
Well, let's say somebody only has a couple hours and they want to maybe get a sense of what the park is about. What do you recommend they do?
If you can't attend an education program, I would suggest going to a place that offers the canal, but then, like a little something extra for you on top of that. So either the Giving Pond recreation area or there's a parking area where you can access the canal and also Ringing Rocks County Park, which is locally a pretty neat spot. It's pretty well known. And even Washington Crossing Historic Park in Pennsylvania, not the New Jersey side in Pennsylvania, our canal flows right through that. So you could see, the canal and canal history, and within just, a few minutes walk, immerse yourself in some Revolutionary War history as well.
What do you love most about the park?
So my favorite thing about the park is definitely the wildlife. So while we're not very big, we do have the Delaware River right next to it on one side, and there's a lot of green place areas that surround it on the other side. So we provide tons of different habitat. So you can see beavers, egrets. Occasionally, we see river otters. Of course, deer throughout the whole park. But I personally am a bit of a raptor nerd. So that's, like your hawks, eagles, falcons, stuff like that. And we have a pair of peregrine falcons in our park. And also bald eagles are extremely plentiful in our area. So my favorite thing to do as an educator, I'll add a little to your question, is I love to teach about the bald eagles and their history in Pennsylvania. And myself, and there's also another educator at the park. Probably our most popular programs are our raptor walks that we lead in the winter. And for those programs, we walk on the towpath in various locations where we know there are bald eagle nests, and we bring a scope with us. So we hopefully get a bird in the scope for our visitors, but we definitely always get an eagle nest in the scope. So, at the beginning of the season, you get to see the bald eagles interacting with each other and creating what we like to call nestorations, getting that nest ready for their eggs and egg laying, and then you get to see them incubating, and then by the end of the season you get to see them interacting with their babies and feeding the eaglets, and it's very, very cute.
I have to sign up for that. That sounds so great.
Yes, yeah, you should definitely come along for one.
New Hope is one of the most celebrated tourist towns in the Commonwealth and located right along the towpath. What kind of role does the park play in local tourism?
So the park plays, I think, a pretty active role in local tourism. Um, it allows for these connections of towns that you might not normally have connections to, and that wouldn't be there without the towpath. Especially in our northern end of the park, there is not, more towns developed there, so the towpath really allows for that connection and also connects to businesses that are right along the canal, some of which were operational when the canal was operational itself. So you can go into these businesses and just access it purely by taking the canal if you wanted to. Um, Another thing that I think is really important to mention here is that a lot of times people don't even realize they're in a state park sometimes when it comes to our park. Almost like the towns and the identity all become one. So in New Hope, for example, one block you're on this really busy street with restaurants and dining, and you go, a block or two over, and you're just immersed in this canal and this towpath, and it's really almost a serene experience to see the differences there and to realize, like, wow, this is right there and now we have this here, as just another experience for tourists.
Local towns also play a really great role as being hubs for being able to rent things if you can't bring them. So if you're, traveling and you're like, well, I don't have a kayak or I don't have a bike, there's so many places that you could stop and actually rent and then be able to move straight into the park with it, which is really great and super accessible for most people.
Yeah, they do offer that as well, and I think that that's really great. I'm glad you mentioned that. You can rent bikes. There are places you can rent kayaks. Aside from, while you can't tube in our river, or in our canal, you can rent tubes for the river. So it provides a lot of business. Yeah.
Across the Delaware River in New Jersey is the 70-mile-long Delaware and Raritan Canal State Park. Together, these two state parks form a series of looping trails connecting Pennsylvania and New Jersey using 7 bridges. How do you see those parks being used by visitors?
I think it's important to note that while talking about the canals, that while we are both canals, we are very, very different. So New Jersey's canal is a municipal water supply. Therefore, you can always expect water in that canal. They have a vested interest in keeping water in it. So if something happens, they want to get water in it ASAP. Whereas in Pennsylvania, we're not maintained for that. So we're more focused on conservation and recreation. So if something like flooding were to occur or there's an issue along our canal, our turnaround time can be a little bit slower. So the loops allow visitors to then always experience water in the canal if that's what they're looking for. And also, we really pride our ability to have that connection with other states and other state parks to allow that for our visitors. There are two shorter loops that are about 7 miles, and then longer loops that range from anywhere from like 14 and a half up to almost 19 miles. So if you're looking for a longer bike trip, a visitor might take the 19-mile one. If you're looking for something shorter, you could definitely walk the 7-mile one in a day. I probably recommend trying to do this one loop that starts at Virginia Forest Recreation Area. And it's up to you whether you go, north or south. But along that route, you'll get to see Lumberville, which has some historic buildings. And the movie The Upside with Kevin Hart, there was some scenes filmed there. So it's a little bit famous. You might recognize it. And then you'll get to see Bulls Island Recreation Area, which has great picnicking and restrooms. You'll pass Prallsville Mill and Stockton, which is a town in New Jersey it's a very charming little river town, and you'll get to see some cliff swallow nest structures here before rounding out your loop all the way.
We talked about it a little bit that the park is such a great place for birding. What other kind of birds can visitors see on their trip? Are there any recommendations for places they might want to go to be able to see them?
Sure. So it is a really, really great place for birding for a few reasons. We have so much different habitat and variety of habitat. And then because we're also right along the river, we are a migration corridor for a lot of species. So spring and fall, you'll see the most diversity, but you can see tons of great stuff. I definitely recommend going to the Giving Pond Recreation Area, just because we actually have a trail there that goes around it, so you can check more out that way. And I don't know, even in winter, there's great birding opportunities. You can see white-throated sparrows and dark-eyed juncos who are here, on their winter vacation. And the spring in the Giving Pond, around the Giving Pond, I should say, we have our cavity nesting trail. So it just fills with life, full of bluebirds and tree swallows and chickadees. And then you just get this chorus of warbling vireos and yellow warblers that fill the air there. So, yeah, I'd recommend trying the Giving Pond if you're looking for birding.
That really sounds great, though I think you made up dark-eyed junco. I don't know if that's a real bird.
It
That
exists.
sounds fake. I don't know about that one.
It exists. It's very cute. It's this little bird. It's a darker color, like a slate color, and has a little white belly.
I'll take your word for it. That
Yeah.
that name is hilarious. Delaware Canal State Park has two designated state park natural areas, Nakamixon Cliffs and River Islands. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Sure. So, our natural areas are home to generally threatened and endangered species. So, our river islands, we have 11 of them, and they are critical habitat for wildlife on their migrations. But also, we have bald eagles that nest on them. So, they're protected species. And some of them have also been important archaeological dig sites. So you can look more into that if that's something that interests you. The Nakamixon Cliffs are 300-foot cliffs. They are about 3 miles long, and they seemingly just like rise up next to the Delaware River. So, geologically speaking, they were formed during the Triassic time period, and magma flowed into the beds of sedimentary rock there, and magma is hot, so it heated it, and hornfels were created, and hornfels are like a weather resistant stone. So they didn't erode away like the surrounding area did, which is how they kind of just rise up out of the landscape there. Um, and the Knockmixon cliffs are really unique, actually. So, because of the directions that they face, they see very little direct sunlight on the cliff face themselves. So, this creates like an Arctic habitat. So, we have alpine Arctic plant communities that grow there. And some of these plants that grow there are. This is the only area south of Maine in the entire United States that they're known to grow is on that cliff. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's special.
Yeah, it's really special. And to add to the specialness of it, we also have a cliff nesting pair of peregrine falcons that call those cliffs home. So that's one of only 22 known pairs in the state that still nest on cliffs rather than man made structures. So those are really cool too.
In terms of the river islands, can people visit them or are they supposed to would you recommend their best viewing from shore or can you actually visit them?
I feel like the best viewing is gonna be from shore because that's how you could actually see, like, a bald eagle nest on them, for example. But you can access, like, if you're on the river, you're certainly more than welcome to stop at them as a pit stop or something, but it's all gonna be carry in, carry out. There's nothing, there to help visitors at all.
And as always, remember your leave no trace principles. Don't do anything. Leave the place as beautiful as when you saw it.
Yes, definitely.
What kind of water activities are available along the canal?
Sure. So, under optimal conditions, you can paddle in the canal. There are places where we have kayak arms, they're called. So, you can put your kayak in and actually paddle in the canal. You can fish, you can ice skate in the canal during colder seasons, which is pretty cool. Um, at the Giving Pond, you can also paddle. It's open to non motorized boating, and also fishing is great there as well. There are a few areas in our park that you can access the river and partake in whatever boating activity you feel, but they aren't going to be large boat ramps or anything like that. So it's more so just for your small kayaks and such.
You mentioned it a little bit before about the Giving Pond Recreation Area. What is it and how can visitors get there?
The Giving Pond is a 50-acre pond located in Upper Black Eddy, and it used to be a quarry and it was left to nature. So we got the Giving Pond in 2002, and now when you go, it's really unique and almost deceiving as to how big it is from the land because there's all these little islands on it that wildlife love and flock to as like safe havens to nest and stuff. So you can walk around the whole pond too if you wanted to. There's a path that goes around it that also connects you to the towpath, so you can make a whole loop if you wanted to. Uh, I think the Giving Pond Recreation Area is probably our most popular and most used in the park. We host numerous programs there all year long as educators under various topics. So even outside of birding and boating, we do plant ID and insects and amphibians. So the Giving Pond is really our home as educators in the park, but it also has picnic areas and grills that you can enjoy while you're there, and you can access it just from River Road. And there are two parking areas, one right next to the road and one closer back to the pond itself and the boat launch.
For such an unconventional park, it's probably the most conventional aspect of it, where there's parking areas and there's kind of designated places for picnicking and things like that.
Yes, probably. Yeah. Some of our other recreation areas do offer that as well, but this is the only one that then gives you access to another water source.
When do you think is the best time or season to visit the park?
This is such a hard question, because I think every season truly does have something different to offer depending on what you're looking for. So if you wanted to come in the winter, you're gonna get a more tranquil experience. There's gonna be less people out with you on the towpath or wherever you are in the park, so you'll have it kind of more to yourself. And you could even like cross country ski or snowshoe or something if that's what you're looking to do. Late winter, early spring, you get this just amphibian chorus that fills the park because we have so much water. They all flock to it, and you can hear tons of amphibians. So that's pretty cool. Um, in spring, you also get our spring ephemerals and wildflowers that start to pop up, and those bird migrations coming through. Summer, it opens it up to more water recreation and things like that, and boating, fishing, and then fall is just so picturesque. It's extremely beautiful here in the fall with the river and the canal and just the colors that take over.
Just go to the park, no
Yes,
matter the
come to the
season.
park.
Yeah, yeah.
Any season will be great.
Do you have any tips for people who plan on visiting the park, or any suggestions to make their visit as enjoyable as possible?
Yeah, I do. So we are a great resource to learn about history, but because we are so close to the river and a man-made waterway, we see the effects of natural disasters much, much larger and heavily than other areas might. So there can be repairs that happen on a somewhat regular basis to keep us operational. So I would definitely recommend reaching out before you decide, like, oh, I have to go to this one location, just to make sure that you can get there and that it's accessible. Our Friends of the Delaware Canal is a great resource for that. You could also do the DNL, the Delaware and Lehigh Heritage Corridor, has an interactive map where they break the canal into, generally it's larger sections. So you're just going to want to read more specifics of those sections to see what's going on. There's always our park website with advisories. But I mean, aside from that, we have 60 miles here of just gorgeous scenery. So you could really pick anywhere you want to go on the map, put your finger down, and hopefully have a really, really wonderful experience.
At this point, I would normally ask how cell phone coverage, but because of the length of the park, does it change? Can you get GPS?
Sure, it really varies depending on where you're at in the park. There are some areas, example, in New Hope, you have great service at New Hope. You get great service up near Easton by the Nockamixon Cliffs. You might not have any for a while, so it really varies.
Well, Gabby, I want to thank you so much for talking to us today. I think you inspired a lot of people who are going to be visiting the park soon.
Good, I hope so. I can't wait to see them all.
I want to thank my guest Gabie Lent for joining the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Meta for more information about upcoming episodes. You can support the podcast by buying merch at hemlockstohellbenders.com. If you're a Pennsylvania business interested in advertising with the podcast, email us at hemlockstohellbenders@gmail.com. This has been Hemlocks to Hellbenders. I'll see you out there. Hosting, production, and editing by Christian Alexandersen. Music by John Sauer. Graphics by Matt Davis.